Welcome to Medical Marijuana and Wellness. Today's subject is going to be cannabinoids, CBD, THC, CBN, Delta-8, and more. Important part of medical cannabis and something that's really important for you to pay attention to if you want to get the maximum benefits out of using medical cannabis. My guest speaker today is Amy Green, an RN who's with MMTC of Florida, who does a lot of patient education. And I should point out that this presentation is for information purposes. Naturally, if you want to find any medical advice, please contact your doctor or your physician. So, Amy, let's talk cannabinoids for a second. First of all, why is cannabis such a big deal? I know that we have a nervous system in our body that we've known about for a long time. But what's interesting is we've discovered that there's also an endocannabinoid system in our body. And this is something they found from studying cannabis that really helps us with pain, anxiety, memory, appetite. And really, this is where the cannabinoids come into play. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So we obviously have a nervous system, as you said. So that's going to, with the nervous system is going to deal with systems like pain, with sensation throughout the body, and it has a lot of different functions. Same thing with the endocannabinoid system. This is a naturally occurring system that's part of your body. Everybody has one, and your body naturally produces cannabinoids. So that's the endocannabinoid. It's inside of your body already.
Yeah, I tend to look at the nervous system. I call it the cell phone system of your body. If something happens, you have a signal that's sent to your brain that says, Houston, we have a problem. What I find amazing is that for so many years, people studied the nervous system, but never tried to figure out when you said, Houston, we have a problem, what Houston did with that problem. And when we found the endocannabinoid system, we found out that your neurons pass this over to your endocannabinoid system, who then produces endocannabinoids that get sent to your body, various parts of your body that really help you try to stay in what they call homeostasis, or your body tries to stay in balance. And that's an interesting little process that goes on. Now, what's interesting about cannabis is that the endocannabinoids that your body is producing naturally are exactly mimicked by phytocannabinoids in the cannabis plant. Tell us a little bit about that, Amy.
Sure. So obviously our body naturally produces cannabinoids. However, we found that the cannabinoids that come from the cannabis plant are essentially identical to the endocannabinoids that our body is naturally producing. So when we use products like cannabis, we are supplementing that system that our body is naturally producing. And that's where we come up with a lot of the benefits of cannabis, is those kind of supplements that we're bringing into the body.
What's fascinating to me is that as we get older, and I'm a senior citizen, my body doesn't produce as many endocannabinoids as it did before. So the phytocannabinoids come in and help the body do its job or stay in homeostasis, which is something that's really, really important. I think not only just for senior citizens, but also for people that have had injuries, that have some medical problems or some medical conditions. This is where you can actually help your body do its job naturally. And I think that's an important part what cannabis brings to the party. So looking at the key components of cannabis, there are cannabinoids, terpenes, and flavonoids. Amy, can you explain a little bit about these?
Yeah, absolutely. So cannabinoids are going to be the main parts of the cannabis plant. So that's going to include things like your THC, CBD, CBDa, THCV. There's a whole lot of cannabinoids in the plant. However, you'll also find terpenes, which are what gives cannabis its smell and its taste, along with flavonoids, which also contribute to the smell and the taste of cannabis. And they also provide some anti-inflammatory, neuroprotective, disease prevention effects as well.
Right. It's interesting. There's so much cannabis research being done right now. We know that there are over 200 cannabinoids, of which we're only studying about 120 of them. We know that there are at least 200 terpenes in cannabis and 220,000 in nature, of which, again, we're only studying about 100 of them. Same thing with flavonoids. We're only studying about 20 of them, yet we know there's over 40 of them. So it's an interesting plant. It offers a lot of medical benefits, and there's a lot more research that needs to be done. But what has been done so far is pretty effective. Putting them all together gives you the entourage effect. What does that mean?
Sure. So the entourage effect is how all of these components of the cannabis plant work together to produce effects. So it's not just the cannabinoids, and it's not just the terpenes or the flavonoids. It's how all of these different compounds work together to produce the effects of the cannabis plant, whether that is anti-inflammation, pain relief, whether that is anxiety relief. It contributes to all of those things.
Mhm. Now, it's interesting. You can see where the cannabinoids working together with CBD working with THC. The CBD lessens the high or the psychoactive effect of THC. So when you're learning how to dose or trying to figure out your dosing, keeping some CBD around really helps you be able to lessen any negative effects you might get from THC.
Certainly, yeah, it can just make it more comfortable, especially for newer patients, especially if they do not want the euphoric high that can be associated with THC. So adding that CBD can be very beneficial.
Right. And THC and CBD working together really enhance the medical values that are there. You had mentioned earlier about the main components, main cannabinoids, and we're going to go through each one of these, so I don't want to go too much in depth on that. But I do want to point out that there's a lot of uses. The reason that why cannabinoids are important is because they have a lot of properties that really help address a number of conditions. Amy, you see that a lot in your practice.
Yeah, I do. So we have patients that come in for every single condition under the sun, and trying to find that product or that series of products that works well for them is really a big part of it. And so we always talk to patients about different cannabinoids, especially THC and CBD, and how those are going to fit into their treatment plan.
Right. And you see whether it's appetite, inflammation, muscle control, specificity, I didn't pronounce that one too correctly, mental illness, addiction, and really, if you look at, they talk about future uses, but current uses of cannabis when it looks at, for example, cancer and helping with chemotherapy and radiation and that type of thing, not to mention including conditions like HIV, multiple sclerosis, lipid, and Crohn's disease. What's fascinating is the National Institute on Drug Abuse down here actually came out and said that medical cannabis is a safe and effective medicine. And I think that's really important. So let's dive into how cannabinoids are formed. And really, there's a component called CBGA, which I think is what we call the godfather of all cannabis. Here's an example of how CBGA then basically morphs into THCA, CBDA, and CBCA. Amy, take us through this, because this is fascinating how you take a plant, and as the plant matures, it produces the different cannabinoids. And by the way, this is not a complete list of cannabinoids, it's just some of the more popular ones and showing where they come from.
Yeah, certainly. So the big thing is, as a cannabis plant is growing, CBGA is going to be the precursor to a lot of these different compounds, whether that is THCA, CBDA, CBCA, or even CBG. It's going to be, like you said, the godfather or the starting point for a lot of these compounds. And then as the plant matures through a combination of heat in the environment and that plant specific makeup, those compounds are going to change into the final profile for that specific plant.
Yeah, it's very interesting. If you take a cannabis plant and you don't heat it over 300 degrees, you can get a lot of THCA, CBDA, and CBCA, which is great for inflammation. It's great for pain, and yet you don't get high. And that's really interesting. A lot of people make their own tinctures where they'll actually take and basically put MCT oil together with their cannabis, cook it at about 180 degrees for 20 to 35 minutes, and produce an oil that gives you the anti-inflammation, anti-pain properties without getting high. I know that's very, very effective.
Certainly. And when you have those raw, quote unquote, raw parts of the cannabis plant, like THCA, CBDA, the biggest thing is you're not going to have the psychoactive effects, but you're still going to have really powerful, anti-inflammatory, antispasmodic effects from those raw parts of the plant.
Sure. And then, of course, once they heat over 300 degrees, that's where you do get your THC and CBDs, CBCs, and CBGs.
Yeah, so when you apply heat to these compounds, it's a process called decarboxylation. All that means is that the form of that compound is changing, and it's changing from an acidic form to a non-acidic form. So that's the difference between THCA and THC. So you've just applied heat and it's changed the structure of that compound. Now, specifically with THC, when you go from THCA to THC, you are going to have psychoactive side effects from THC now. You're also going to have a lot of other effects as well. So you're really going to have a boost in the analgesic, the antibacterial, anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory effects of that compound just by applying heat and changing the base form of that compound.
As it morphs. Same thing with CBD. You look at CBD, it really, there's a lot of more properties that are produced once it starts, when it gets heated.
Absolutely. And CBD is one of the most powerful cannabinoids, and probably the best part of it is that it's not going to produce those psychoactive effects that you might get with THC, but you're still getting all of these really important properties. You have the analgesic effects, the anxiolytic effects or anti-anxiety, antibacterial, can also be an antispasmodic, and it can help with neuroprotection. So that's protecting your brain and the nerves and the cells in your brain.
Sure. And we'll go through each of these different cannabinoids as we go along, but also as the product ages, that's where you get into your CBNs, your Delta-8 THCs and things like that.
Yes. So when we say aged, usually when cannabis is harvested, heat might not necessarily be applied to it. However, it might be dried, and that's part of the aging process. And when you have that drying process, you're going to morph some of these compounds into slightly different compounds. Like right. THC is going to possibly morph into Delta-8 THC, which is slightly less psychoactive than regular THC.
Right. Now, what's interesting is there are very few plants that actually start producing more medical value as they age or they get heated. Cannabis is just a unique plant from the standpoint of providing medical value. It's just really, really interesting that's there. And we talked about CBG. It really is the genus. It's where everything kind of starts, and then with heat, it really produces a lot of the other cannabinoids. But as a product or as a cannabinoid by itself, it has a lot of medical value.
Absolutely. So CBG is really great for helping with glaucoma. It can help reduce the cell growth rate in cancer cells, so it can help with slowing down some cancers. It can also be neuroprotective and may help with slowing the progression of some diseases such as Huntington's, Alzheimer's, dementia, and other similar illnesses.
Mm-hmm. And it's found in very small quantities because if you think about it, once the plant starts morphing, it's actually reducing the amount of CBG because that CBG is turning into other cannabinoids as it goes along, which is very, very interesting. So same thing goes on with THCA. What it does is it has great medical properties, and it also is with heated and with time, it'll turn into THC. But let's talk about the medical properties of THCA because it's a very popular product.
It is. So THCA is the non-psychoactive form of THC with the addition of an acid. So this is like the original form of THC before any heat has been applied, and this compound really has a lot of benefits, including being a great anti-inflammatory. It can help with the slowing the progression of cancer growth. It can be a neuroprotectant. It can help with treating MS, Alzheimer's, or Parkinson's.
Right. So it's really something that really helps quite a bit. It also helps stimulate your appetite as well. Now, that then what's morphed into THC or Delta-9. Delta-9, although it does have the psychoactive or psychotropic effects, it is very, very important as a medicine because it does a number of things, important things like blocks the pain signals to your brain. But the medical benefits of THC are just enormous.
Absolutely. So THC, or Delta-9 THC, is going to be the most well-known cannabinoid. When people think of cannabis, they're really thinking about THC or Delta-9 THC. This specific component of the cannabis plant has so many medical benefits that research is still coming out on. So it's really great for anxiety, epilepsy, glaucoma, insomnia, low appetite, muscle spasticity, and on and on and on. There are just so many things that this particular compound can possibly help with.
Yep. And working with CBD helps to lessen the psychoactive or high effects. So it turns out to be very effective when they both work together. Let's talk a little bit about CBD, because CBD is really, really important from the standpoint of addressing the CB1, CB2 receptors, but also it has more receptors than just that. In other words, we found out that CBD in essence is a super vitamin.
It really is. So when we think of the cannabis plant, there's two main receptors that we think of, and that's going to be CB1 and CB2. However, when considering CBD, there are so many additional receptors in the body that this particular compound can attach itself to. So it's going to connect to the 5-HT receptor, which is a serotonin receptor, which can help with digestion, blood flow. Then you have your A2A receptor, which is part of your inflammation and coronary circulation process. Your VR1 receptor, which is responsible for body temperature and pain perception. And then you have your GRP55, which is a receptor that is partially responsible for blood pressure in the body.
Right. So there's a lot of medical benefits beyond the CB1 and CB2, which is promoted with a lot of the cannabis literature. Really, CBD is really something that really helps in a lot of different ways with a lot of different conditions. Very important. And this is kind of a map of the different cannabinoids and to the receptors, just to let you know that there is medical science behind this, and it really know that this really works. This will be included in the package you receive after this seminar. CBDa, this is really important.
Absolutely. So CBDa is the acidic form of CBD. So this is the form of the compound that has not had heat applied to it. There's a lot of really great benefits with CBDa. So you have really strong anti-inflammatory benefits, which is probably the number one thing that people use CBDa for. Then you can have the interaction with your serotonin regulation systems, which can affect your mood, your feelings of nausea, vomiting, or intestinal regularities. CBDa also becomes CBD when you apply heat through a process called decarboxylation. All that means, it's a very fancy word for meaning heat was applied and the acidic part of that compound was removed by that heat.
Right. And also it has 100 times more of the binding affinity to the receptors than CBD, which makes it very important to help when you're trying to address things like inflammation that's out there. And of course, as we mentioned, when it's heated, it gets heated, it turns into CBD, which has a tremendous number of medical benefits.
Yeah, certainly. So CBD, since it is the non-psychoactive part of the cannabis plant, a lot of people are using it for its anti-inflammatory effects, anti-seizure effects, especially anxiolytic or anti-anxiety effects, anti-tumor, neuropathic, and nerve pains. There are really just so many things that can be benefited by CBD.
Yeah, and it also helps to address things like MS, helps people get off of the opioid addiction. There's a lot of talk about it, also treating and addressing diabetes and the insulin that we have, ALS, and other benefits, including Parkinson's and MS and schizophrenia. So CBD is a very important and probably one of the primary cannabinoids in cannabis. One cannabinoid that gets a lot of press is CBN. It's basically known to help with insomnia.
Yeah, and the really interesting thing about CBN is one of its effects is it usually gives you a very heavy body feeling, which is great for both relaxation and for getting to sleep and staying asleep. So it can help improve the quality of sleep that you're getting, which is so important for just body recovery and making sure that your body is functioning the way that it should be. But it also has a lot of other benefits, also anti-inflammatory. It can help with glaucoma. It can help stimulate your appetite. And it's been shown to help delay the onset of symptoms associated with ALS and other neurodegenerative conditions.
Yeah, it also helps promote bone growth. So if you have an injury, and CBN is something that's really good to use. CBC is not got a lot of press, but this is one that has a lot of great medical value.
Certainly. So the really nice thing about CBC is it's not going to produce any psychoactive effects. So it's not going to increase psychoactive effects that you might be getting from a compound such as THC. And it can help, it may actually intensify the effects of THC, but on its own, it's not going to have any psychoactive effects. Now, CBC does originate as CBCA, or the acidic form. And again, through the process of decarboxylation or applying heat, you're going to remove that acid group and you end up with CBC. Now, CBC does not have a high binding affinity for either CB1 or CB2. However, it does act on the TRPV1 and TRPA1 receptors, which are responsible for detecting and regulating your body temperature.
Right. And also those also have a lot to do with that same receptors also have a lot to do with playing a role in pain. And again, working with THC, it really helps to help you reduce the amount of pain that you have in your body. So, the medical benefits not only are anti-inflammatory, but also antidepressant.
Certainly. And a lot of that is how it's interacting with the different receptors in your body and whether it is blocking them or assisting other cannabinoids with accessing that particular receptor.
Right. And it's great for migraines and also anti-cancer effects, which is very important for a lot of people. Let's talk about THCV. Again, not necessarily something that people know much about, but really an important part of cannabis.
Certainly. So THCV, it's a compound that does not appear naturally in large quantities in the cannabis plant, but it is still a very important cannabinoid. One of the biggest parts of THCV is it can actually help suppress the feelings of hunger, which can be great if a patient is trying to avoid the munchies or those kind of hunger pangs that you might get with THC.
Right. It also helps with bone growth, again, for people that are trying to recover from different from injuries that are there. This is one of the main cannabinoids that addresses things like Parkinson's, for example, and that's really, really important that's out there.
Certainly. And it's also been shown to have some effects on epilepsy as well.
Yes, good point. That's an excellent point. CBDV, again, one of those cannabinoids that are important.
Certainly, yeah. Again, this is a non-psychotropic part of the cannabis plant, so it's not going to contribute to the psychoactive feelings that a patient is experiencing, but it does have a lot of great benefits, including recovering from memory deficits or neurological deficits, as well as it may help with controlling obsessive compulsive behaviors. And then it can also be a potential treatment for neuronal hyperexcitability. Right,
that's very important. Good cannabinoids. Now, we know of the two well-known cannabinoids, which is THC and CBD. THC primarily targets the CB1 receptors, although it does address CB2 receptors as well, but CBD primarily addresses the CB2 receptors and is also found in hemp. I think the main characteristic is one's psychoactive and the other one's not psychoactive. But when we go down into looking at that whole area of being psychoactive, Delta-8 comes to mind. And really, Delta-8 is really let's say a variation of Delta-9, but it's not as strong.
That's right. Yeah. So Delta-8 is very similar to Delta-9, but it does have some marked differences, including being about half as psychoactive as Delta-9. So you could expect to not have such a psychoactive experience or feeling if you are using that product.
Right. And it's mainly found in a lot of the Delta-8 products that you see on the market are really derived from hemp, that's out there, because the THC that's being used in cannabis is being used for a lot of other medical purposes that's out there. But Delta-8 has a lot of medical benefits. When you take a look at it, it's actually a pretty good product, although it has some warnings. We'll talk about that in a moment. But tell me about the benefits of Delta-8.
Sure. So Delta-8 can help with a lot of different systems in the body. For the stomach, it can help with antiemetic effects, or stopping vomiting or relieving vomiting. For appetite, it's been shown to improve appetite, but without the heavy psychoactive effects that you might get with Delta-9 THC. For the brain, it's going to have neuroprotective properties by increasing the body's level of acetylcholine, which can help with memory retention. For pain, Delta-8 does bind to the CB1 receptor, which mediates pain in the body. For sleep, Delta-8 can be really relaxing and soothing and can help you get a good night's sleep. And then definitely for relaxation, Delta-8 can help work as an anxiolytic to help reduce some anxiety and just help with the feeling of relaxation and kind of winding down.
Yeah. Now you find Delta-8, just like Delta-9, is found in cannabis. It's in the plant itself. But what's been happening lately is people have taken and tried to isolate Delta-8, mainly using hemp that's out there. And I think the biggest problem is the quality of products, because hemp-based products here in the United States are really not regulated. There's a lot of warnings about Delta-8 products that are on the market. You might want to mention a little bit about that, because you really want to check out what they call the certificate of analysis on the products. I know that when I did a webinar on Delta-8, we went out and went to literally 5 different outlets that sold Delta-8 and only found that one of them had a COA on the side of the package. That's very dangerous, because a lot of this stuff can be candidly junk, not being regulated by either the federal government, state governments, or the medical marijuana programs in the states. This is a real problem, and I know that's what's creating a lot of the negative press that Delta-8's getting.
Certainly. And that's a lot of this is exactly because you said it's not regulated. And so you don't have the same requirements for testing that you have with the state regulated medical marijuana markets. When you have mandatory testing, you're able to tell the quality and any adulterants in the product. You're able to see if it's been exposed to any molds or funguses. All of those things are normally tested for in state regulated programs. However, when you have a product that is not being regulated like that, you don't have that same testing or that same requirement for testing.
Right. And the reason we bring that up is because Delta-8 is found in such small quantities, especially in the marijuana plant. It's very hard to produce large quantities of the product at a competitive price. So if you find a fairly inexpensive Delta-8 product, beware, because it may not have the quality that's needed. And again, it's not regulated. So I would go with, if it doesn't have a COA, especially one that has to do with that particular package, not the batch, but that package, really buyer beware. That's one of the real negatives, unfortunately, of Delta-8. Now, let's talk a little bit about what a COA looks like. It's basically a barcode that's on the product, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. And any product that you get from a state regulated medical marijuana company, they are going to be able to produce the certificate of analysis for any product that you purchase, whether that is an edible, a tincture, or a vape. They're going to be able to show you that it was tested for heavy metals, foreign materials, residual solvents, any contaminants, any mycotoxins, funguses, anything that you could think they are testing for it.
Yeah. What I also want to show is that now we use the COA from a medical cannabis product from Move. So this is not a Delta-8 product. And Move does not put out or sell Delta-8 by itself. But I do want to point out that these COAs should be fairly universal, and that when you have a regulated program like a Florida medical marijuana dispensary authorized by the state of Florida, you will find that these COAs are out there, and it's universal between really quality hemp products or medical marijuana products. but these are absolutely critical to make sure that you have a safe product to use. And I cannot emphasize more, the problem with a lot of Delta-8 products is they're not safe. And that's what gives the image and the product really a bad name. I mean, let's go back and kind of wrap up, because we've been talking about the different cannabinoids, and let's kind of wrap up on this slide. There's over 200 different cannabinoids we know of, but really there's an interesting process where the plant actually produces a number of medical components in it through the cannabinoids. Is that correct?
Yeah, so obviously you have the CBGA, which is, like you said, the grandfather of the cannabinoids. And then as the plant matures, it's going to morph those compounds into different cannabinoids, whether it's THCA, CBDa, CBCA, CBG. You have, like you said, hundreds of cannabinoids that it can morph into as it matures. And it's just, this is one thing where the COA really helps you with seeing what is exactly in your product.
Right. Now, we only touched on a very small number of the cannabinoids that are available. We could spend literally hours talking about the different cannabinoids that are out there. We're really trying to hit the, what I call the Hall of Fame, of the ones that are the most popular. Hopefully this has answered a lot of your questions about cannabinoids, what they can be used for and what they're good for. And Amy, I want to thank you for your help. And for those of you that are watching, please feel free to take a look at following us on social media. Go to our YouTube page. You'll find more videos on cannabis and the use of cannabis. And feel free to sign up for our webinars at Marijuana Aware, weekly webinars on how medical cannabis can help with various conditions. And or if you want to, send us an email. Thank you very much for joining us. And we look forward to hearing from you.